really excited to introduce Debbie Pushor here this morning. I was recently at a conference here on Monday and Tuesday in Edmonton, sponsored by Alberta Education, looking at Alberta Initiative for School Improvement and successful projects around the province. Had a chance to present there. And in one of the sessions I was in student engagement, one of the participants raised their hand and asked what, in their project, what level of parent engagement had they been successful at, and had they ever read any of the work of Debbie Pushor from Saskatchewan. And as that comment came, I gave an elbow to the person beside me saying, she's coming to our school on Saturday. So Debbie's career began with Edmonton Public Schools, where she began as a teacher, a consultant, a principal, and then a central services administrator. Her experience with her own school-age children caused her to look at her doctoral work, which was a storied photo album of parents' positioning and the landscape of schools. She graduated from the U of A in 2001 with her PhD in elementary education, then began an academic position at St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia from 2001 to 2004, teaching in the Bachelor of Education and Masters of Education program in educational leadership. She then joined the University of Saskatchewan in 2004. She's currently an associate professor in the Department of Curriculum Studies in the College of Education. And along with that curriculum vitae, she's also the mother of 3 sons. Cohen is 20 years old, and twin boys, 16-year-old twin boys, are in grade 11, Teague and Quinn. We're definitely excited to have Debbie with us. And at that point, I'd like to turn it over to Debbie Pushor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. It's such a pleasure. This work is a passion for me. As Curtis said, I'd been an educator for a long time before I had children of my own. And it was really when my own children started school that I realized how much parents were not a part of that at times, right? So as a teacher, as a consultant principal, I loved school. I always had a place there. I was so excited about first days. And then I took Cohen to his first day of kindergarten, quite emotional, right? Taking him there, my first child, first time. And I didn't know what to do, right? I wasn't sure. I had Teague and Quinn in a stroller, and I wasn't really sure if I was allowed to bring that stroller in or not. And then, I mean, it was a double-wide stroller. So when I got to the kindergarten door, you know, do I leave Cohen? Was it okay to go in? If I went in with him, was I one of those interfering mums that couldn't let go and needed to, you know, overprotect my child? If I left, was I one of those moms that didn't really care, not that interested, had other things going on? So I just was so confused by that day, and I was so lost, I guess, and feeling like there wasn't much of a place for me in Cohen's life in that moment in time. And so as things unfolded, my first Meet the Teacher night, my first parent-teacher conferences, really trying to figure out what is my place with my children at school, and not often being very invited to be a part of it, right? And so it was at that time that I decided to go back and do some doctoral work, and this became the focus of my doctoral work. And it continues to be as exciting and as important to me today as it was then. Cohen's now 20. Think how many years I've been doing this, right? And yet I do think this is a piece that we're not paying enough attention to in education. It's a piece that could truly make a difference. I believe it's a piece that could change schools in significant kinds of ways. So I'm really thrilled to be able to be here and talk with you about it. I'm going to start with an activity, and I want you to just think inside your head for a minute, first of all. So when I say that term, parent engagement, what are the first 5 things that come to mind for you? Okay, so just quickly inside your head. All right, let's hear them. What kinds of things did you talk about? Shout out.
Reading at home.
Reading at home. Role modeling, okay?
Ensure your kids come to school well fed and well rested.
Okay, great.
Room mom.
Room mom, perfect. Couple more? So, okay, encouragement, excitement. All right. How's that? Is that a little bit better? All right. Now, what I want you to look at, and your answers are interesting there, are these primarily parent actions or activities that are requested by the school or ones that you've chosen to support your children with as parents? It's interesting. When I do this session with educators and I say, what are the first 5 things that come to mind when you think of parent engagement, what do they say to me? They talk about parents doing homework. What else do they talk about? Volunteering, reading with children, coming on field trips, fundraising. Isn't that interesting? So often when I talk to teachers, they see parent engagement as being the kinds of things that all of you do to support their work. The things that you do that serve their agenda in terms of getting their work done here at school. And yet when I ask you as parents, you see your role as being somewhat different from that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So now I want you just to think for a minute about your own parents or the folks that raised you. I'm going to play a little bit of a song, Good Mother by Jan Arden, and I want you to think about your own experiences. Your mom, your dad, maybe your grandma, grandpa, and auntie and uncle, whoever was responsible for your care as you were. Okay, think again inside your head. What makes your mom a good mom, or your dad a good dad, your grandma, good grandma, and so on? Just think about that for a moment, please. I want you to add this question to your conversation, please. What have you learned from your mother or your father, or that person who was your caregiver when you were growing up? Okay, so talk about that as well, please. Okay, I'd like to hear from you, please. So in terms of those 2 questions, what made your mother a good mom or your dad a good dad? What kinds of things did you talk about there, please? Shout out. Love. They loved you? Okay. What else? Again? Okay, can you give me an example? What might they have role modeled for you?
My mom was the secretary of the school.
Okay.
So, Charlene just said respect.
Okay.
Yeah, it was,
Being respectful.
I didn't have to go to the principal's office.
Okay. Okay.
My father read stories to us.
Nice. Okay, so your dad read to you. Wonderful. Nice example. Other kinds of things that made your parents good parents? They taught you values, for sure. Responsibility.
Humor.
Humor. Beautiful. Yeah, for sure.
Just always being there and absolutely memories about my mom.
Exactly. That they're always there for you. Someone mentioned love earlier, that sense of that it was unconditional. Always there for you. So when you think of a message or a way you live in the world now, something you carry with you, something that you've learned from your mom and dad, what might it be? If you had a line you hear your mom and dad say or you did while you were growing up, what was it? Wait till your father gets home. For sure. What other kinds of things? Do what you said you were going to do, for sure. What other kinds of lessons do you carry with you?
Treat people how you want to be treated.
Exactly. Treat people the way you'd like to be treated. Right. So it's interesting, isn't it, then, the kinds of things that when we think about, or specifically when educators often think about that term parent engagement, they'll talk about laminating, photocopying, volunteering, going on field trips, reading with children, making sure homework's done. Notice that not one of you have that kind of memory that you hold from your parents, right? So when you think of what your parents gave you, what you've taken away from that, what was important to you, there's a real contrast in that. And that, I think, is a really strong message for us in terms of what does it mean to be engaged in our children's lives. Often in the literature, the words parent involvement and parent engagement are used interchangeably. Involvement's probably used more. And for me, those words are really different words. They mean different things, and we need to use them kind of consciously. Language has a lot of power, and so when we say, well, what does it mean to be engaged in our children's learning? To me, that looks really different than if I'm involved in my children's learning. So when you look at that word involvement, it comes from a Latin word, from involvere, to roll into. And so for me, when I talk about parent involvement, I'm thinking about the kinds of things that we're rolled into in a school or a school system, things we're co-opted to do, brought into the act by another party. So involvement is exactly that. It's doing the kinds of things that the educators or the school system asks us to do to support the agenda of the school. Those are not bad things. I'm not saying that. They're important things. Often there's lots of things that we know our kids will have an opportunity to do if we help. So it's good. What we want to remember, though, I think, is that that's not enough. That's one piece of it. If you think of it on a continuum, involvement is an earlier part of that continuum. It helps the school do the things the school needs to do. But engagement does so much more, both for our kids' achievement, their staying in school, and so on. Curtis mentioned a lot of the research earlier on parent engagement. It's the kinds of things we do as engaged parents that make the difference. Important to know that if you come to school and do a lot of laminating and photocopying and help your teacher out, your kid is not going to do better in school, right? But those are sometimes the kinds of connections that are made. So we really have to look at what is it we do that enables our kids to do better. So involvement are the typical kinds of things that we often see. Organizing events, arranging fundraising when we're an audience member for something our kids are doing at school, when we're supporting classroom activities. And again, like I said, I don't mean to imply that those are bad things, because they're all good things. But just how are we thinking about what else we can do? So when we break apart that word engagement then, when we look at where it comes from and what it means, it has a really different meaning. Engagement means to make a pledge. So when I engage with Curtis at this school, I'm making a pledge to Curtis. Curtis is making a pledge to me that we're going to work together in the best interests of kids. It's a moral commitment, a different kind of relationship. I've, again, really consciously not used the word partnership because I think it's a really overused word. We hear it all the time, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. So when we look at engagement, think about engagement in other parts of your life. When you were engaged to be married, if you happen to be married. When you were engaged with a really good friend. When you're engaged with family members. That sense of the intensity of the relationship, the importance of the relationship, the give and take of the relationship, right? Things in my relationship with my husband, Lori, go a lot better when I give sometimes and take other times, but not when I do one or the other all the time, right? So we have a vested interest in our children. We both care deeply about them. We both want them to succeed, and we both work at that with real earnestness. That's the kind of relationship that we're looking for with parents and educators in school. We want that kind of caring commitment. So engagement then, it means that we're in a relationship that isn't superficial, that isn't hierarchical, where we're serving the school's agenda, and it means that it's about teaching and learning. Dawn Benson did her doctoral work at Simon Fraser University, and one of the parents in her study said, the only thing we ever get to talk about is hot dogs and plumbing. Right? We've all been there, haven't we? Right? What color are the school t-shirts? You know, should hot lunch be pizza or hot dogs this month? And so on, right? We've done that kind of stuff. And so how do we make sure our engagement moves beyond that into the teaching and learning? And where our engagement really makes a difference is when we're involved in those kinds of rich conversations, the very essence of what schools are about. So engagement, if we're engaged in our children's schooling, then we're helping to create the agendas in terms of what's happening at school council meetings, what's happening in terms of activities within the school, decisions that are being made about programs that will be offered or not offered, homework policies, discipline policies, all of those kinds of things. We have an equal voice in those. So we help to set the agendas, to make the decisions, and then to take the action, right? So we're all equally engaged in all parts of that process with a voice that matters. one of the things that I think is really important is that when we're engaged, that encounter is rich for all of us. Everybody's strengthened. Kids benefit, obviously. Staff benefit, but that you feel richer as well. So that everyone goes away feeling that they've gotten something out of that relationship. So that becomes a piece, I think, that's important. When we look at the research, it says that parent and community involvement that's linked to student learning. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about parent engagement, has a greater effect on achievement than general forms of involvement. So if we want to make a difference to our kids, we need to work towards that level of engagement. Bill James did a meta-analysis. And he looked at, a meta-analysis means he took a number of research studies that had been done. So he looked at a whole lot of the research. And he said, when I analyze this, what is it that I see that's making the difference? And what he found that it wasn't the kinds of things that schools often ask parents to do that were the things that were making the difference. So it wasn't the fact that you come to school council or that you're there for assembly, that you make sure that your child has a time or a place to do homework, that you check their backpack or check their homework to make sure it's done. When he looked at those particular things, they were not the ones that were making the difference to kids' achievement. Teachers are shocked by that, by the way. Teachers are shocked by that often. Instead, it's the kinds of things that you mentioned earlier when I asked you what are the first 5 things that come to mind when you think about parent engagement. It's those kinds of things. The fact that as parents we create an educationally oriented ambiance. We create a sense in our homes that learning is important, that school is important, that we want our kids to do well, that we want them to be respectful people, that we want them to be curious, that we want them to ask good questions, be imaginative, be creative, and so on. So that sense that we create these expectations for our kids and we support them in achieving them is really the part that made the difference. So often we look at those specific things. There'll be a school council meeting, 5 people will come. What will teachers say the next day? And I don't mean to be negative about teachers. I am one. I love teachers. They have a hard job. It's a paradigm shift we're talking about. We're talking about thinking about our work differently. So we have a school council meeting, just a few people come. What do we say? Oh, these parents don't care. You think if education was important to them, they'd show up at the meeting, right? So we make judgments, we make assumptions about why people weren't there. When in fact, maybe those parents that weren't at the meeting were home like Kelly's dad reading to her. Maybe they were at the hockey rink with their kids. Maybe they were watching something on Discovery Channel. I know at my age, with high school kids, and I've been involved in the system for a long time, when the school council meeting comes around at my kids' high school, I'll go, what's on the agenda? Grad. Okay, my kids aren't graduating this year. I've been away for 3 days. I'm going to stay home with my kids, right? So I may look to the high school like a disengaged parent, one of those parents that never comes, doesn't care, when in fact the opposite is true, right? I'm making a different decision. So we have to be really careful about those assumptions. So those very particular things might not be the things to measure. The counting we do might not be the right way to know how engaged our community is. So there's other things that we'll want to look at instead. So that academic socialization we do, another term for that educationally oriented ambiance, what we do to create a sense that learning is important for our kids. Hill and Tyson Brumell, they do work primarily with middle years kids, which is interesting. So often we talk about the research relates to our elementary kids, but true with our middle years as well. So the kinds of things that make a difference are communicating expectations for, or talking about the value of. The things that you mentioned earlier, right? School is important, learning is important, I want you to do well, so on. Linking schoolwork to current events. Why is this relevant? Do your kids say to you all the time, why do I have to learn this? right? For sure. And so how do we make connections to show how what they're learning is significant in the work we do, the world we live in, current events that are happening in our world, and so on? Why might they want to know? How do we encourage their aspirations, who they might want to be in the world, what they might want to do when they finish school? How do we talk to them about the way they learn or make sense of things, the strategies they use? How do we help them make plans for their future? So those are the kinds of things that often make the difference. So then our question for those of us who are educators, Curtis or myself, is to ask ourselves, then how is this what we promote with the parents of the children we work with, rather than some of those other kinds of actions, like coming to meetings or helping on hot dog day? So the kinds of things that we can do are often things that we do not in the school, but outside of it, right? The things that are invisible sometimes to school folks. The things that we create around rich activities or experiences. I don't know your name, your tag is? Beth. Beth was talking about hiking with her daughter. Like, wow, right? That's an educationally enriching activity. Those kinds of things that we do with our kids around sports, around animals, around jobs we have at home, around arts and crafts and all of those kinds of things we do with our kids. Making books available and other materials, books and computers and all of the kinds of ways that kids learn. Taking them places, to museums or art galleries, on trips, right? All of that stuff as well becomes the kinds of things that make the greatest difference to our kids' learning and their achievement in school. So here's a good one. This one, honestly, say this to a group of teachers. Alfie Cohn has done a lot of work lately. It's been sort of a passion of his to look at that whole idea of homework. And there's quite a few researchers now that are looking at homework. And they say that they can't find good evidence that it makes a difference to kids' learning. Like, wouldn't you like to take that off your agenda every night? Wow, I would. I had, when Teague and Quinn were in grade 1, they were in a classroom where they had to do their spelling words, right? The Monday pre-test, the Friday test. And they had really challenging words. And it was hell. It was hell. Those weeks were not fun, right? We'd start with those words on Monday. We'd work with them all week. And it was hard work. And there was a woman who was a parent in that class as well. She had one son, Luke. Her name was Denise, and we got to be friends because our kids were in the same class. And Denise called me one night and she said, "Is anybody crying at your house?" And I'm not talking about Luke either, right? And we talked about that. If you could take the roofs off of houses about 8 o'clock in any community at night, what would we find, right? Tension, anxiety, tears, stress, frustration, nagging, all that stuff, right? Often homework isn't a good part of our lives, not a good part of our lives with our kids sometimes. And so then these are the kinds of things that we have to look at. If those aren't the things that are making a difference anyway, and they're creating all that stress, what else could we do instead? Maybe that hike after school is a much better activity than trying to get that math sheet done, right? So I want to play with that a little bit more, that who are we in our kids' lives? What can we do? And how could it look different than it does? So as more of the research, Cooper is another one who does a lot of research on homework, says that homework can actually undermine achievement in some situations. So if it interferes with a student's autonomy. So that's those moments when people at the science fair say, "I know that kid's dad did that assignment, not him," right? Have you ever seen that? Where the parents take too much ownership, perhaps, for that, and instead of letting the child have more ownership. Or in times when there's a lot of pressure, right? Pressure to do well, pressure to get it done, all of those kinds of pieces. Or, did your kids ever say this to you? "That's not how my teacher showed me." Try grade 11 math. Wow, I have no clue. My strategy is hire a tutor. But then it's that problem where the teacher's showing it this way, we're doing it this way, and the child's saying, well, that's not the way the teacher says, and I'm not sure, and things just get really mixed up. So how do we change that? How do we be different people with our children than the person trying to help them with the homework? I did a research study in a core neighborhood in Saskatoon. It's a neighborhood called Riversdale. And Riversdale, if you read our newspaper, our local newspaper, is the neighborhood that has the highest crime rate, the highest number of First Nations families. It has the highest level of poverty and so on. So, you know, it's a neighborhood that when you go there, people will say, make sure you lock your doors, right? It's actually a very wonderful neighborhood. And I did research at a school called Princess Alexandra Community School. So some of you that have read my work will have probably seen some work from that. In that school, we were looking at the high engagement of parents in that school. So it was a small school, 235 kids probably at that time. It was about 97% First Nations, and in our city of Saskatoon had the highest rates of parent engagement and parent leadership. So the school was doing some really amazing things. And the research that I was doing is trying to find out, how did you get here? What have you done? What led you to this place? And so I was spending time talking with parents and saying to them, do you consider yourself an engaged parent? Tell me why. What do you do? And so on. This is not a real picture of this parent. And I'll call him David for the sake of today. And David had 4 children at home at that time, 3 boys and then a girl that they adopted at birth. She wasn't actually adopted, but she'd lived with them since she was born. So he was raising that family in this really tough neighborhood. And so I said to David, do you see yourself as being engaged? And he said, for sure. And I said, tell me then what you're doing that you would call engagement. And he said to me, I'm working the fridge. He said, you're working the fridge. And I had never heard that term before. I didn't know what it meant. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. So David said, then come to my house. Their family was on social assistance. David had a criminal record. He had a disability, had a steel plate in his head from an accident at one point in his life. And so he wasn't working at that time. And when I got to their home, he showed me the fridge. And the fridge had in it the kinds of things all our fridges do. You know, some mustard and some ketchup and those basic kinds of things. But that's all it had in it. That was it, right? So that top shelf of condiments that you probably have in your fridge, there was some of those and the rest was empty. And so David and I sat together at his kitchen table and we talked about this expression of working the fridge. And he said, well, you know, being on social assistance, I have X amount of money to spend. And so if I work the fridge, it's a way for me to not spend all of that money on things that I need. So we have a center called the Friendship Inn. If you go to the Friendship Inn in the morning, they give out bread. So he could go to the Friendship Inn in the morning and get bread, which meant he didn't have to pay for it, right, out of that set amount of money that he had. And then he would go to the food bank and get some food there. And he worked, he did some roofing on the side, kind of under the table, where he'd do some roofing, make some cash, put that in his pocket. He exchanged jobs with people, he said. So there were certain things he knew how to do that he could do. So he might do something for Ken would do something back, and then he didn't have to pay to get his taps fixed or his whatever, you know, whatever he needed. That saved him some money. And he said he worked the fridge in order to put those little bits of money away to buy his kids brand name jeans and brand name shoes. And he said to me, a lot of people think poor people shouldn't have those things. That my kids shouldn't have brand name jeans or brand name shoes because we're poor and we're on social assistance. So that isn't a right for my kids. But he said to me, we're poor and we're Aboriginal. The chances that my kids are going to stay in school are already about this big. Now if they don't fit in either, they don't have the stuff all the other kids have, those chances get even smaller. He said, I want my kids to finish school. I really want my kids to finish school. So he said, I'll do whatever I need to do to make sure that happens. So that was working the fridge. So my question to you, was David an engaged parent? Absolutely. And yet, the school might not have known. I think in this particular instance, they probably did. But we might not know. All of that work, all of that energy is going into keeping his kids in school. Princess Alexandra is a pre-kindergarten to grade 8 school. Lots of the kids don't finish grade 8. But David's did. All of them did. All of them did. And all of them went to the collegiate 9 to 12. And they made it through there too. Right? His daughter's still there. And they've gone into trades and they've gone into different things. But he kept his kids in school. I don't know if he showed up at school council meeting. I'm not sure he fundraised. Pretty much guarantee he didn't. Do you know what I mean? And yet the kinds of things that we often talk about aren't the kinds of things David was doing. But David had huge impact on his family. So let's look at what was happening there. For one thing, David got to define his engagement in his own terms. He did the things that he thought were important for his children to continue to learn and be successful in school. Wasn't something the school asked of him, but something he decided. It used his personal practical knowledge. It used the expertise he had. He knew the neighborhood. He knew the resources. He had a network of friends. He knew how to find the bread, get the food bank donations, and so on. He had that all figured out. He had skills and strategies that I certainly wouldn't have in that circumstance, right? So he had a lot of knowledge. Knowledge that isn't sometimes recognized in our schools as being really important. But knowledge that was enabling his children to live well, do well, right? And he got to put that in play. Engagement means we use parents' knowledge as well as teachers' knowledge. It was strength-based. Put David at the table with his boys in that grade 11 math. And how would David feel? Lost, maybe incapable, maybe lesser, maybe frustrated, maybe like a failure, right? I know I felt really helpless sometimes when I sit down with my kids with some of the stuff that they're working on. But instead, because David could define the way he wanted to be engaged and could take charge of that, he worked from strength, which gave him the opportunity to be someone who had something to offer his kids, not someone who didn't. Big difference. Here's one for me that's really important. It enables the parent to be the parent. David got to do the kinds of things dads do, that parents do for his kids. He didn't have to play teacher, right? And even though I am a teacher, I find it really hard sometimes to be a teacher with my own children. They don't want me to. That's not the relationship I want to have with them. It changes the good relationship we do have, right? So parent engagement, to me, means being engaged like a parent, not being engaged like a pretend teacher. So when my kids were, I don't know, I guess it was probably kindergarten, they'd get those little kindergarten reading backpacks to bring home, right? And they had the little book in there and had a little laminated card with activities we could do, and it had things, right? Depending on the book, it would have a skipping rope or a ball, or it would have chalk, or it would have crayons and paper. And then there'd be that card that said, these are things you could do with your children. I hated those backpacks. I hated them. My kids had to do every single thing on the cards, and there was 2 of them, right? We had to do everything before those backpacks went back. But it wasn't what I'd normally do. Like Kelly's dad, I read to my kids a lot. I love books and I love reading to my kids. It was one of the most precious things about being a parent, was that cuddle up with a book. But the card didn't give me the chance to do that. The card asked me to find all the things that rhyme with fun. Find words that begin with the letter R. Again, those are good things to do. They're teacher things to do. I want to bake cookies. I want to read books. I want to walk in the river valley. I want to go to a movie. Right? Those are the things that moms do. Those are the things that dads do. Right? So how do we ask parents to engage with their kids like a parent? Not like a pretend teacher, because that's not comfortable for lots and lots of parents. It creates that educationally oriented ambiance that James talked about with his meta-analysis. David was creating a sense in his home that school matters. I want you to stay in school. It's the future for you. It's what's going to get you out of poverty. He told his kids that all the time. So he was creating that strong sense. Here's the other piece. It was concerned with schooling and education. Curtis's job as principal is to ensure kids do well in school. That's his job. That's his mandate. But we're there from birth to forever. Our job's education. Schooling is one part of our children's education. Right? But all those other things you talked about, teaching values, right? Modeling, doing cool things with your kids, taking them places, that's education. And that's your job. So while we want to totally support our kids' schooling, we have to remember our job's even bigger than that. Right? So we don't want to get caught just in the schooling part of it. We want to remember that our job is bigger than that. It looks a little bit different. And then the other thing is those kinds of things that I'm talking about, the kinds of things that David did, the kinds of things you mentioned, often don't happen at the school. So again, when we think about our parents' engagement, it is what happens here. But we can't forget there's also lots of it happening in other places as well. So we really want to honor and acknowledge all of the things that parents do in all those other places, in homes, in rinks, in community centers, in arenas, and farms, and fields, and mountains, and so on, are also places of parent engagement. So what I want to look at then is, how do we know, how do we ensure that the school, all of the staff at the school know about the ways that we're engaged with our kids outside of school, and then how do we ensure that that gets brought into the curriculum? That what we learn about our children in all those other places comes to the school and we get to talk about our knowledge. We get to share what we know about children and teaching and learning so that it can get set beside what teachers know so we can make better, richer decisions for kids. And it's not a place of parent knowledge replacing teacher knowledge, but it's a matter of positioning them together. So that, just think of the power of the teacher's knowledge and ours, and we use all of that to make decisions for kids. So when you think about your community, this school community, or some of you drove in from other places, your children go to school in other places, you think about that community, what is it that parents are doing to be engaged in their learning where you live? So 4-H, awesome, great example. I'll give you a minute. Talk to the people beside you because we'll get lots more talk that way then. Go ahead and buzz about that. What are people doing that's perhaps engagement in their children's learning? Okay, I'd love to hear from you. What kinds of things did you generate? What are parents doing in the communities in which you live? Shout out, nice big voices. So we had 4-H. What else? What else are people doing? Sorry? Oh, wonderful. Activities at the library. Nice. Great. Church youth group. Wonderful. Volunteer coaches. Fabulous.
Something as simple as chores.
Absolutely. Chores at home is huge. Right. Yeah.
I spend a lot of time with music with my kids, actually. I've been teaching them piano and they teach piano lessons, and we spend plenty of time.
Beautiful.
It's less about the skill level. I don't care if they're
Yeah.
musicians, but it's
Yeah.
time.
Wonderful. Yeah, that whole engagement with music is such a rich one, for sure. Thank you. Other things?
Know your relatives.
Yeah, totally. That whole family connection, right? Because everybody teaches different kinds of things, right? What they learn from their grandparents will be different than what they learn from you.
They see different work and different things they do and what their cousins are doing.
Nice.
Gives them encouragement.
Fabulous. Wonderful. Great examples. Thank you. So how do people at your school know? How do they know that the kids are doing music with their mom at home, engaged in 4-H, spending time with family members, going to programs at the library, and so on? How does the school know that? Sometimes the kids will tell them, for sure.
In small towns, teachers are often part of groups.
Right.
Young children involved in it, they know us.
Wonderful.
Parents say,
Yeah, and that's a really good point. In a smaller community or a more rural community, there's a different relationship often. Yeah, good point. Thanks. How else might they know?
Children's behavior.
Yeah, sometimes. So can you give me an example of what you're thinking, Russ?
Well, children that are often involved in things like that would have a little more settled
Mm-hmm.
and engaged in whatever it is that is now in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might be even just the kinds of things they talk about, right? They show that they have knowledge of things that they might not have otherwise, for sure. Darlene? Mm-hmm. 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 Again, if I go back to Princess Alexandra's School, with a high number of First Nations families, although the children, many of them in that particular community were living in poverty and had all kinds of challenges in their lives that come with conditions of poverty, they were often kids that were going to powwows and feasts and drum ceremonies and pipe ceremonies and so on. They had tons of cultural knowledge. It was all kinds of teaching and opportunities going on that were outside of what was happening at school. And so then how does the school act on those wonderful, rich experiences, right? So one of the things that I think is really important for us as parents is to ensure that the school knows what kinds of things our kids are engaged in, the kinds of things we're engaged with them around, so that that can become part of the curriculum in the school. It can become a focus of school-wide or classroom activities, so that the kinds of knowledge that we have can be part of that. So again, if David was sitting with a teacher at the school, what kinds of things would he have to say? What has he learned about his kids? How would he share his hopes and dreams? How might that shape some of the activities that are happening at school because of the kinds of things that are happening in their family or in their community in support of their children's learning? What I want to do is move into some possibilities. They're just ideas, ways to think about how our engagement with our schools often works. These are Saskatoon, snapping pictures. It wasn't hard, it didn't take very long. Look familiar? So we often say that we want our families to be engaged in our schools, and yet this is the first thing that happens when they get there. Right? So we say we want their engagement, we want them to be a part of what's happening, we want to hear their voices, and then there's all of this sort of taken for grantedness around the school that sometimes sends a different message. I like the one, registered visitor parking. It's at my son's high school, and I pull into this really big high school. It's about 1,600 kids, and I think, registered visitor, would that be me? Am I a visitor? Is a parent, would that be a visitor? Or does that mean like somebody important that's coming to do something in a classroom? And if I am a visitor, how do I register? So could I park here and run in and register? And that makes me eligible to use the stall? Or No. So I've always wanted to say to the principal, how do I become a registered visitor? Right? We do these crazy things. I call it taken for granted, right? We have all of this stuff there, we don't even think about it. But we send these messages. So think about if you're a new Canadian parent, or if you're new to the community and you don't know the protocol, you don't have the history, right? Then what do you do? How do you know? Right? I was a parent in Edmonton, and as you know, I'm sure it's the same here. It's certainly the sense I get that, I walked in and out of that school all the time, right? There was lots of opportunity for me to be in my kids' school. I picked them up, I dropped them off. And then when we moved to Nova Scotia, I operated as if that was the way that things worked. That was the only way I knew, right? And my son Teague forgot his lunch one day. Although we lived in the small town of Antigonish, all the kids got bused to school. So kids are off to school, I'm on my way to the university, I realize Teague's lunch is there, I grab his lunch, drive to the school, go charging down the hallway. And someone pops out of the office, can I help you? I said, no, it's okay. I know where I'm going. No, just a minute, please, stop. I said, I'm just taking Teague's lunch, he forgot it. And the secretary said to me, no, give it to me. I'll take it to him. I said, no, I really want him to know that his lunch is there. Like, kids freak out if they don't have a lunch, right? All morning he'd be sweating, I don't have a lunch, right? So I wanted to be sure he had a lunch, he knew he had a lunch, we were both happy, everything was good, I could go to work, I didn't have to worry, right? She said, I'll call him down at recess. I thought, wow, I don't know the rules here. I'm breaking all the rules. I didn't mean to be. I was just going to take him his lunch, right? So when we're new in a place, we often don't know. So how do we know how we can be engaged, how welcome we are, what the rules are? How do we take down some of these signs and put up different ones instead that say, welcome, we're glad you're here. Stop by the office and say hello. Different than visitors. Please report to the office. Right? Same message, more inviting, right? How do we change some of that? Again, at Princess Alexandra, one of the neighborhoods that's considered high crime and unsafe and so on, they took down all their signs. They just decided they were going to take them all down. They didn't need them, that they'd use other ways to let people know. So you come to the door, I happen to be passing by, I say, hi, welcome. Can I help you with anything? Or, hi, welcome, I'm glad you're here. If this person didn't belong in the school and has already been recognized, how long would she linger? Probably not. So did we need the sign that said, visitors, please report to the office? So they just started doing things in a different way. When they were doing home visits in their community, they noticed that most families didn't have family photos on their wall. And yet they knew family was really important to each of the families. But it was, again, an income thing. They couldn't afford to buy the school photos. So Yves Bousquet was principal then, and he talked to their photography company. Because the photographers come and they take all the pictures. And if no one buys them, they just throw them out, right? So they're losing money anyway. So he said to the photographers, hey, how about if you come and take our photos, but you have them be family photos instead of individual children's photos, I'll buy an 8x10 for every person that you take. I'll buy an 8x10 if you'll give us an 8x10. And so they made this deal. So everybody could bring anyone they wanted to be in their family photo on picture day. It's really quite a scene there on picture day, I have to say. So then one photo Yves bought, and they framed them and they put them along the hallway. The other one they gave to the family. It became a gift to the family. At the end of the year, or I guess that's beginning of the next year when the new ones are taken, the new ones go up and the old ones go home, so the family has a second one. So instead of that sort of sign, the signs that you see, you walk in the school and down the hallways are rows of family photos. So again, that sense, do I have a place here? Do I belong here? Is this my school too? Is a really strong message that gets sent quickly, that this is a place of families, that this is our school. So it's really a beautiful way of kind of undoing some of what we so typically do. In your community, you may know each other as teachers and as parents. What about when you hire new staff? I asked Curtis, he said he moved here from Drumheller area. What if you hired me and I came from Saskatoon and I don't know Claire's home, right? I don't know your community or your customs or some of the things that all of you take for granted. What about then if we have a parent orientation of new staff? The parents are the core of the community. They've typically been here the longest, been rooted here. So often when new teachers come, it's the staff that orient the new staff. But what if parents did? What kinds of stories would you tell? How would you introduce your community? What kinds of things would you be able to share that would help those new teachers settle into your community so much more quickly? Become so much more a part of the fabric of your community. Know quickly what you value, what your hopes and dreams for your kids are, the kind of community you're working to be, and so on. Bill Murphy was a graduate student of mine at St. FX in Nova Scotia, and Bill started his career by flying up to Fort Liard in the north, and that's where he began his career as a new teacher. He said one of the richest things that ever happened to him was there was a cultural, I don't know what they called her, maybe a cultural coordinator. She was a woman from the community, and one of the things that she did when new staff came is she went with that teacher and had tea in all of the houses in which, of children that teacher was going to teach. So before Bill started school in September, in that August period, and I don't remember the woman's name, I'm sorry, Bill and that woman went and had tea. They had tea with Ruth. They had tea with Russ, right? They had tea with Jazz. And he met all his families. So on the first day of school, he'd met the kids, he'd spoken to the families, he had some background information. He had much more of a sense of this new place that he'd gone to work. So again, possibilities to bring our engagement, our lives into the school. A community walk or drive, same kind of idea. Again, in the city that can be important, but I think it could be important here too. I mean, just driving around a little bit last night when I arrived, what would I learn? What would I learn if I was in the car with Ken and we were going around the community as he was telling me about, oh, that's the old Siemens place, right? I'd learn about the economic base of your community. I'd learn about the kinds of jobs you had. I'd learn about how long your arena's been there and what happens there, what kinds of activities are available for kids and families, and so on. So again, how do we learn about a community from the community itself rather than someone else, right? Often especially in the city, when a new staff member comes, other staff members tell about the community, but often they don't live there themselves. They drive in every morning too, right? So it's a story of the community. It's not the community's own story. This is one that I really love. When Cohen was in grade 3, he had a teacher named Michelle Mayani, fabulous, fabulous teacher. And on the first day of school, she wrote a little note, and Cohen brought it home in his backpack, and she just invited all of us as parents to write her a letter and tell us about our child. What do you want me to know? What would you like me to know about your son or daughter? What would you like me to know about your family? I don't know if she said for sure what are your hopes and dreams for the year, but she kind of gave us the opportunity to tell her anything we wanted. And I have to say, when I got that note, I cried. I'd wanted to do that every year, right? Especially Cohen's kindergarten year. I just thought, oh, there's so much. How can, I'd never leave him with a babysitter that didn't know lots of stuff. And yet here I was taking him to the kindergarten teacher and leaving him. And she didn't know he had such a good sense of humor. That was going to be important. How could I leave him if I didn't tell her that, right? All of those things that I just sort of was dying to say. And here was my opportunity to do that. It was so significant for me. Michelle continues to be one of my very good friends. We really bonded over that opportunity to share our lives and to share our time with Cohen. And it was significant. I think if you ask Cohen, he would probably say, if he was citing a teacher from his whole schooling, that would be the one that he said really mattered in his life. I want to read a letter. It's a Dear Parents letter. This is just an example. It's coming from a book called Living Between the Lines. It's an older book. Let's see, 1990-something. 1991, and it was written by Lucy McCormick Calkins and Shelley Harwain, and it's actually a book about writing. But in this book, they talk about how they invited parents to write letters at the beginning of the year to tell them about their lives and their children's lives so they could make curriculum out of it. How do you have things to write about if I don't know what your life is about, right? So this is a letter written by 3 teachers to their class in this school that had a focus on writing. I read this and I think, I'd love to get that letter. So see what you think. Dear parents, I'm writing to ask you to help me become a partner with you in your child's education. I will only have your child for a short time in this trip through life, just one fleeting school year, and I want to make a contribution that lasts a lifetime. I know my teaching must begin with making your child feel at home in my classroom, and with helping all the children come together into a learning community made up of particular, unique individuals, each with his or her own learning style and interests and history and hopes. Would you help me teach well by taking a quiet moment to write to me about your child? What's your youngster like? What are the things that you as a parent know that would be important for me to know? What are your child's interests? I want to know how your child thinks and plays and how you see your child as a learner and a person. Respectfully yours. In the teacher's name. Isn't that lovely? Wouldn't it be nice to get asked that? And again, it's going to look different in different communities. Not everybody writes. Maybe it's meetings, maybe it's phone calls, maybe it's casual chats at the door of the classroom, right? We know that there's different literacy levels and ways of doing it. But the key is that they ask. So then I think, so why do I feel like I have to be asked? I could write that letter, right? So as parents, we don't have to wait to be asked. We could write those letters, and we could tell our teachers about our children so they had that information. Again, some of these things are within our control to do. So how might we share what we know about our child with the teacher who's going to teach our child that year, or the teachers? Family stories. Often in our curriculum, there's lots of room to work with big ideas. Often with our little kids especially, we start with units on me. We get to know the child first, and then we get to know the school and the community and so on. How do we begin those years by telling family stories, by making that a way to come together and to know our families? Jo Beth Allen's written a book with some folks in the States, and in a grade 1-2 classroom, what they did is they started the year with their little ones by having them, they read lots of family stories to the kids. Lots of stories about families of all different kinds. And then they invited children to start to tell their own stories, sometimes write them, sometimes tell them. They even had a little stool in the classroom with a mic. You know those little mics you buy at like Toys R Us or whatever that have a battery in them? Look kind of like this, but they're not as swishy as this one. But the kids would sit on the stool. What they did is they made a big deal out of it. And they'd have the kids sit on the stool and they'd tell their story about their family. So instead of the typical show and tell, this is my teddy bear, right? They'd tell some kind of story about their family. And the teachers were scribing them and writing them down. And then in their parent meetings, what they would do is they'd be sharing books with the families and saying, hey, here's a book that we read. And they were showing them different literature and different stories about families. And they invited the parents to write and tell family stories as well. So some of the parents would come into the class and tell their stories. Some of them wrote them down. And they ended up creating a book of family stories. Ones the children told, ones the parents told, and that became part of their class library. But just think how much information those teachers had to work with, right? How much they knew, how much of a relationship was being built, how it was moving to that sense of care and commitment that I talked about when I talked about what engagement really is, right? That opportunity to bring our lives to school and have it become central to the curriculum. Photo Voice Project. I did this with a group of grad students in the summer, and it was really phenomenal. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I'd never done it before. They were really nervous about it. And I think it ended up being probably the richest thing we did. Photo voice is when you give a family, you make a connection with a family, you give them a camera and you ask them to take pictures of their lives, things that are important, whatever they want, it's up to them. And then when you meet with them, they tell you about the pictures. They tell you what's in them, why they took them, why they're important. So the thing about photo voice that's really cool is the family decides what pictures they take, and the family decides what they tell you. And that becomes a scrapbook, a photo album, a PowerPoint, iMovie, whatever, right? And so the grad students that I was working with this summer were primarily kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, primary teachers, although there were some that were older as well. And they joined up with the family and spent time. And they said it was life-changing for them. The things that they learned, the things that they came to understand that they just didn't know before, and how it changed the way that they teach in the future. Jolynn, one of the students in the class, this summer class was in July, decided to do a photo voice with a little boy that had been in her kindergarten room the year prior. So she just finished spending 10 months with him. And so she chose that family, and she asked the mom, and the mom said sure, they'd be happy to help her with her assignment. And so she took the camera and she left it with them and went back and visited as the mom and the children told stories to go with the pictures that they'd taken. And at the end, when she put hers together in a PowerPoint, she took it and took her laptop and shared it with the family. And then she took the kids to the store to buy a little treat, thank them for being part of her project with her. The little boy that was in her kindergarten said to her as they were driving to the store, Jocelyn, do you do this with all the kids? And she said, no, I just picked you. This is the only time I've ever done it. And he said, well, you should. And she said for her, it was such a moment, that relationship that it developed. But also she said, there were so many things that she didn't know that she would have done differently had she known. Thank you so much. The little boy had made a Father's Day project in June, like often we do in schools, right? And as she spent time with the family, she realized that the boy's original father had died quite suddenly of an illness, and that was a really hard spot for their family. And the mom had been with a new partner, and not that long before he'd left. That relationship didn't work out. So here she had this little boy doing the Father's Day project in June, right? Who was he going to give his project to? Who was he thinking about when he created it? How did that position him in that moment or in that experience doing a Father's Day project without a father, right? So how could her curriculum change? How could she do things quite differently with the information now that she knew and the kind of conversations that she'd had with the mom? And she said it became really hugely different. So, an opportunity. And these, I want to say, these are just ideas. I'm just throwing out ideas. So often when we talk about things, we think, oh, I could do that. It isn't about the practice. It's about really the belief that underlies it. What does engagement mean to you? How do you want it to look? What relationship do you want to have with the teachers and staff at the school that your children go to? That's really the important piece. Who do you want to be in your children's lives? A couple of more examples. So often we say parent engagement is important. Sometimes it's even in our school division priorities, right? But when things are important, we typically put them in practice, right? So is there a regularly scheduled item on the staff meeting agenda where we talk about parents or families, where parents or families are invited to come in and talk about something, where an issue or concern for the families or the parents becomes a conversation, or just something they want to do? Again, at Princess Alexandra, parents came to Eve when he was principal and said, we don't believe there's enough supervision on the playground. And he said, yikes, we're small staff, we're all really overwhelmed here, let's talk about this. And the parents said, well, could we help? Could we supervise? And Eve said, I don't know, let me find out. And so he said, well, if you were going to supervise, what would that look like? And they talked about it. So they decided, he did get permission for them to supervise, and they decided that they needed some support to do it. So he scheduled some workshops. One was on first aid, how to use an EpiPen, some of that stuff. And one was on managing conflict, what to do if the fight breaks out or whatever, if there's a problem, with equipment and sharing. And so the parents had the opportunity to attend the workshops. Everybody, staff or parents, wore those, those fluorescent orange vests so that the kids knew who the legitimate people on the playground were. And they had a solution. So they had lots more support with the supervision. The staff didn't have to increase their workload. And it was something the parents raised as being important, and they came to a really good solution with it. So how can there be time dedicated to talking about the things that are really important to us so that it works its way into policy or practice or routine within the school? How might it even be the parent who leads the 4-H club coming to say, well, this is what 4-H is all about, or whatever, right? How do we share our lives in ways that make a difference? Home visits. Do you do home visits at all here? Do any of your schools do home visits? Okay. So again, I mentioned that Bill did home visits as his way to begin his relationship with families up in Fort Liard. In Saskatchewan, for our pre-kindergarten children, home visits are a requirement. That's how the teachers first begin to know the families. And again, I think so much good stuff can happen in a home visit. For parents who aren't comfortable with the school, who don't tend to come here, who haven't had good experiences, maybe they just don't have the time, their shift work or their work doesn't enable them to. It's an opportunity to shift the ground and to share information in a different kind of environment. When it's the parents' home, they decide if you come in or you don't. You stand on the step, you stay for a long time, you stay for a little, you get tea or you don't, right? In terms of who's in charge of it, it changes a lot. It can be a place of great learning. Again, especially in our cities, when we have folks from all over the world and from different cultural and religious groups, how do we learn about the kinds of things that are important in their lives? How do we begin to attend some of those pieces to learn from them? What about a parent welcome wagon? Maybe it's a parent welcome wagon for new staff that come. You do the kinds of things that welcome wagon do to welcome new staff to your community. Maybe it's a parent welcome wagon for other parents, where you really welcome them, you talk to them about the school, the kinds of things that are happening here, how they can become engaged with it, ways that are playing out in your school. What about a community door-to-door campaign when you're doing something like this parent conference? We're really good at door-to-door campaigns with the Cancer Society or diabetes or political campaigns. They're probably the best at it, right? They have all their little maps and they go door to door and leave their brochures. How do we begin to share information with one another? By making contact with every single family, every single parent in our community, right? Because we know the structures and systems to do it. How do we make sure that we're not just getting the same parents we always get? Because it's what Carmel and I talked about a few minutes ago. Who's here today? The engaged parents, right? That's why you're here. So what about all the parents that aren't? How do we engage them? So how do we use some of these other strategies to make contact, to let them know they're important to us, that we want them to be a part of our community with the school? School-wide community study projects. Often we can do things where the whole school takes on a project and becomes engaged in something together. It's a deeper way for everyone to know the community. Reggio Emilia in Italy is known for their early childhood kinds of programs. Some of you may know the Reggio approach. I had the opportunity to visit in Italy a couple of years ago, maybe even 3 now. And they had done this wonderful project of their city. And the little kids are all preschoolers. They mapped their city. So they went out and about all over and they drew pictures and they wrote about it and they talked about it. And they have this beautiful book that showcases Reggio Emilia through the eyes of the children. But if we did that in a school like this, we could do it in relation to jobs and resources and how goods and services are moved. You think about our curriculum, all the ways that we could gather that information as part of our curriculum bringing together in natural ways the lives of our teachers and the lives of our families. Okay, to wrap up, I just wanted to tell a quick story. In my first year of teaching, I worked with two girls named Shannon and Tennis. They were sisters 1 year apart, so their birthdays were within a day or two of one another. And as a brand new teacher, they invited me to their birthday party. Their birthday was in May or June. It was towards the end of the year. And I was teaching in a neighborhood in Edmonton at the time. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll come to your birthday party. So when I get there, they live in a lower housing, you know, a lower, kind of a subsidized housing complex. And the place is kind of run down. There's a hole in the screen and the cat's going through, right? And when I stepped into the condo, you know, the bifold door on the closet was kind of broken and hanging, and someone had knocked an ashtray onto the carpet just in the living room here, and people were just walking through it, right? So my impression of this family, and I'd worked with them for about a year already, you know, I mean, I'd made lots of judgments and assumptions, lots of impressions, right? So I go, the kitchen is to this side, and I went into the kitchen, and they invited me to sit at the table, and they introduced me to Grandma. And Mom is at the counter, not too far away like Ruth. It was tiny. And she picks up a coffee mug. And I thought, oh, great. You know, we'll have cake and coffee and have a visit. And the mom says to me, what do you take in your rye?
A little bit of coffee.
Yeah, I should have said that. I wasn't smart enough to say that. So I thought, what do I take in my rye? What am I going to do? I'm a first-year teacher. I don't have a contract. Like, I mean, I could get fired. Are we supposed to drink in parents' homes? What do I do? Like, I'm all freaking out here, right? So I said, ginger ale. So I'm sitting at the kitchen table having a rye and ginger ale at 4 in the afternoon with my children. They weren't drinking the rye, just to be clear. They just weren't. And thinking, what the heck is going on here, right? Like, how did I end up in this place? But the birthday party unfolds. The birthday party is Grandma, Mom, and me. We are the birthday party. And what I learned is that Grandma has ridden a bus from Winnipeg to Edmonton to come to the girls' birthday party. Wow, like Winnipeg to Edmonton is a long bus ride, right? And as we played games and had cake, we did do those things too, I learned so much about their family. I learned how important family was to them. I watched them play together. I watched them laugh together. I watched them tease each other. I learned their nicknames for one another. It was really beautiful. So I walked in judgment and assumption, and I walked out recognizing what richness there was in that family. So it really changed how I knew them, how I interacted with them, the kinds of things that happened for the girls in my classroom after. So that sense of coming in relationship, knowing our families, can change so much. So that opportunity for us to share what we know. Derek was another boy I taught in my first school. He was really cute. He came from this amazing family. He was super good in math. He was artistic. He was athletic like crazy. From Edmonton, their family went to Jasper every second weekend so Derek could race on a ski team out of Jasper. In the summer, he raced BMX bikes. His life was amazing. He had all this great stuff going on in his life, and he had so much success and support. But he couldn't learn to read, and that was my job, to teach him to read and write. And he was struggling. He was struggling. And it was really hard because usually he was successful. Things came pretty easily to him. And so this was really darn frustrating. And there was days of tears and tearing up papers and all kinds of stuff. And I was trying to figure out what strategies and skills to use. And I went and watched him ski race. One of those hills in Edmonton. One Saturday I went and watched Derek race. And I watched the kind of person he was on the hill. And I learned so much about him. You know, the sense that he had these strategies that if ski conditions were one way, he skied a certain way or he used different equipment. If it was another way, he changed it up. He fell down, he got up, he persevered, and so on. And so when we sat down and talked about his skiing, we could begin to say, okay, Derek, you know everything you need to know to learn to read, right? We're just going to transfer it over. So all the things I learned about him as a learner on the hill, I could now start saying, just like with skiing, you need more than one strategy, Derek. You can't just sound it out. That isn't working for you. What else could we do? So when we could move back and forth, it's like everything opened up for him. So again, that opportunity for me, once I knew his life outside of school, changed his life inside school. And just to finish that story, I know I'm over time, Curtis, I'll wrap up here. It was about, I worked with Derek for about 3 years with his reading, with his language arts. And sometime in there, it was before my husband and I had kids, we were going out to Kelowna at Christmas time to spend time with Laurie's brother. And Rick said to us, well, let's have Christmas up at Big White. His family was avid ski people. I'd never had skis on my feet. And I'm terrified, right? So there we are out at night at Rabbit Hill trying to learn to ski enough, or at least to get on and off a ski lift so that we could go ski with our family at Christmas time. So I was telling Derek about these crazy experiences that I was having and how badly it was going for me. And he said to me, Mrs. Pushor, you taught me how to read. I know I could teach you how to ski. So that's the reciprocity of it.